Anyone who ever tried a chaotic life hack that wasn't supposed to work but somehow did, what was it? A few years ago, I was living in a tiny apartment during college, perpetually broke, perpetually behind on laundry, and perpetually terrified that my roommates would find my mountain of dirty clothes and declare it a biohazard. I was also dealing with a fairly aggressive bedbug infestation that had somehow survived my half-hearted attempts at fumigation and had made my life a living hell. One night, in a mix of desperation, sleep deprivation, and boredom, I decided to try something completely ridiculous, a life hack I had seen on some obscure forum where people were swearing by microwave-powered laundry sanitization. The basic premise was that if you could somehow isolate small items of clothing, wrap them safely in parchment paper, and microwave them in 10-second increments, you could kill germs, odors, and even bedbugs without doing a full load of laundry. The hack was chaotic as hell and technically unsafe, but I was already at the point where a few sparks and a burned sock seemed like a reasonable price for survival. I started with my socks because they were the smallest, easiest targets and also the most disgustingly smelly. I wrapped one sock in parchment, placed it on a microwave safe plate, and hit 10 seconds. Then I stared at the microwave for about 30 minutes, half convinced it would explode, half convinced I had just discovered a secret life hack that could revolutionize my life. Amazingly, when I pulled the sock out, it was warm, smelled vaguely neutral, and seemed clean. I almost cried. Encouraged, I carefully microwaved the rest of my socks, underwear, and a few t-shirts I couldn't bear to throw in the laundry pile yet. By the end of the night, my clothes weren't just sanitized. They had a kind of crunchy warmth to them that made me feel like I was living in a 5-star hotel for sock hygiene. The next morning, I noticed that the bedbugs, which had been crawling over my bed and walls like tiny angry ninjas, had somehow retreated. I can only assume the combination of microwaved clothes and the general chaos of my experiment had somehow disrupted their breeding cycle. The apartment smelled faintly of warm cotton and toasted paper, but it was tolerable. I even went so far as to start using this method as a regular thing, microwaving socks, underwear, and t-shirts in rotation, carefully timing each cycle, and avoiding any items with metal or embellishments. Every week, my roommates would comment on how strangely fresh my laundry smelled, completely oblivious to the fact that it was coming out of a microwave and not a washing machine. One evening, the experiment escalated. I realized I could microwave not only clothes but also towels and small blankets if I cut them into sections and carefully managed the cycles. I even tested it on my gym shorts, which were previously a nightmare of bacterial growth and lingering sweat. Somehow, against all odds, the method worked. Everything smelled clean, nothing caught fire, and the bedbugs seemed utterly defeated. I was riding high on a wave of chaotic life hack euphoria, convinced I was a genius, an unsung hero of domestic innovation. Then came the day of reckoning. My microwave, which I had neglected to clean properly in my excitement, started emitting a weird, slightly alarming smoke. I panicked, thinking it was the end of the experiment, or worse, the end of my apartment. But instead of catching fire, the smoke dissipated, leaving my clothes and towels even softer than before. As if some strange chemical reaction had occurred, I had accidentally invented the world's first microwave-based laundry sanitizer and softener, at least in my apartment. Word of the miracle clothes spread. My roommate asked if I could try the hack on his hoodie, and soon the whole apartment was bringing me clothes to microwave. I set up a rotation system, timing everything like a military operation. By the end of the semester, I had perfected my own chaotic laundry method: socks in the morning, underwear in the afternoon, towels at night, and random t-shirts sprinkled in for maximum effect. Everyone else started calling it the Wizard Laundry, and I became the unofficial laundry guru of our college dorm. What made this completely wild was that every part of the hack violated common sense and safety guidelines. Microwaving fabrics was universally warned against. Online bedbugs were notoriously resilient. Yet somehow my chaotic, half-baked experiment not only worked but turned into a fully operational life hack that no one could believe. My roommates were thrilled my laundry was clean, and the bedbugs finally seemed to disappear from my life, at least until the next infestation. But by then, I was ready. The hack had side effects. Some clothes did get slightly scorched edges, and a few socks shrank to toddler size. My microwave emitted a faint smell of burnt parchment paper for weeks. I also developed a weird habit of timing all my activities in 10-second increments because of the ritualistic nature of the hack. But these were small prices to pay for survival in my chaotic college living nightmare. Eventually, I told a friend outside of school, and he nearly fell over laughing at the concept of microwaving your laundry. But when he tried it himself, it worked too, leaving him dumbfounded and slightly terrified. We both agreed that this should never be taught in public or recommended to anyone else because it was too chaotic, too dangerous, and far too genius for the outside world to handle. In the end, my chaotic life hack became a legend in our apartment, whispered among new roommates like some secret mystical method of survival. It was dangerous, nonsensical, and absurdly effective, a perfect storm of desperation, ignorance, and accidental genius. Every time I see a sock or a t-shirt, I can't help but smile, remembering the nights spent standing over a microwave watching my life spin out of control in the most productive way possible, and that, my friends, is how I accidentally discovered a life hack that was not supposed to work, defied all logic, and somehow gloriously did. This one happened during my first year working at a small grocery store, where the shift manager was terrifyingly strict about break times. One day, I was slammed with a line of customers that stretched from the front register to the produce section, and I realized I desperately needed to pee. Normally, you just go on your break, but my break was 30 minutes away, and the line was not going to disappear. So I started brainstorming, chaos style, because conventional solutions were impossible. I remembered that the store had a weird policy. If you filled out a complaint form about a malfunctioning restroom, management was technically required to give employees immediate restroom access. So in the middle of ringing up a cartload of broccoli and tortillas, I grabbed a clipboard and started filling out a form complaining that the employee restroom toilet had a seriously malfunctioning flushing mechanism that could cause catastrophic flooding. I used overly technical terms I had just Googled, like hydraulic backflow risk and structural overflow hazard. While pretending to type furiously, I discreetly slid my pen toward the bathroom door and started inching toward it, holding the clipboard like a shield. The line of customers didn't notice. Or maybe they were too absorbed in my overdramatic typing. When I reached the bathroom, I shouted over my shoulder, "Request for immediate maintenance and employee restroom access formally submitted," and slammed the door behind me. To my shock, no one stopped me. Inside, I realized the bathroom was empty and I was free to relieve myself. But here's where the chaotic part kicked in. I had filled out the form so ridiculously that when management came to inspect it, they got completely confused. One manager actually stood at the door furiously flipping through the paperwork, muttering about risk assessments and liability concerns. While I calmly washed my hands, I emerged 10 minutes later victorious, and the line of customers had mostly disappeared because another cashier had been drafted. After that day, I realized the hack worked so well I could use it regularly. Each week, I'd concoct increasingly absurd restroom complaints, ranging from unregulated chemical exposure from cleaning sprays to microbial outbreak threat from improperly sanitized toilet paper dispensers. Somehow, the store never disciplined me. In fact, they started leaving the bathroom access problem alone because they were terrified of the next form I might submit. The best part, one day, the regional manager came for an inspection. I had a full lineup of ridiculous complaint forms stacked in my locker, each more absurd than the last. When she asked why I was carrying so many forms, I smiled innocently and said, "I'm just keeping them for risk management purposes. You never know when OSHA might want to inspect." She took one look at my carefully detailed charts, graphs, and diagrams and immediately retreated, muttering something about overly diligent employees. From then on, I became a legend at that store. New hires were told about the bathroom incident, and everyone whispered about the employee who weaponized a complaint form. My hack had escalated to a full-blown strategic operation. I even started coordinating with coworkers who needed to go but were too nervous to create their own forms. We created a rotation carefully orchestrating the timing of urgent restroom complaints so that the bathroom was available exactly when needed. By the end of my first year, the store's bathroom access policy was technically broken in my favor. Management didn't want to confront it because any attempt to revoke access risked another chaotic complaint form. It was absurd, it was terrifying, and it worked perfectly. I had turned bureaucracy into a life hack machine, and every pee break felt like a small chaotic victory. Eventually, I left the store, but the legend endured. Former co-workers told me stories of how my complaint forms continued to scare new managers for years, and all of it started with a simple, chaotic idea: bend the rules. Exploit the loophole and somehow miraculously survive. It was dangerous, stressful, and entirely ridiculous, but it worked. And for one brief shining year, I was the king of employee survival hacks, ruling over a tiny bathroom like it was a strategic fortress. This happened during my freshman year of college. I was living in a tiny dorm with paper-thin walls, and one of my roommates was a professional snorer. I mean, it wasn't just regular snoring. This guy could produce sounds that rivaled a chainsaw in both volume and unpredictability. Normally, you'd just invest in earplugs or move rooms, but it was the first week of school and every dorm was full. So, desperate for sleep, I started concocting a chaotic hack that I didn't think would work. I remembered reading somewhere that white noise could mask external sounds, but I didn't have a white noise machine. What I did have were dozens of old phone chargers, a broken blender, and a portable fan. My chaotic hack involved orchestrating a symphony of low hums, static, and vibrations to drown out the snoring. I placed the fan near my pillow, set the blender on a low speed in the corner of the room, covered with a towel so it wouldn't fly apart, and stacked my phone chargers in a messy spiral to create micro-electrical hums. At first, it was a disaster. The blender vibrated so hard that it nearly fell off the desk, and the fan occasionally shot gusts of air into my face. But after some trial and error, I discovered the exact combination of vibrations, hums, and airflow that somehow masked my roommate's chainsaw symphony. For 3 nights, I actually slept. Not just dozed, but real sleep, for the first time since moving in. The chaos didn't end there. Word of my setup got around because my roommate was convinced that I had somehow installed a psychic anti-snore machine to mock him. He kept peeking into my corner, trying to figure out how I was producing this magical noise. I played along, talking about phase inversion frequencies and resonant sound masking, which I mostly made up on the spot. People from the hallway started asking to see my contraption, and I ended up giving impromptu demos of what I called the sleep stabilization array. Then, disaster struck. One night, a roommate from across the hall came in, tripped over my phone chargers, and sent the blender crashing to the floor. It broke, spewing bits of plastic and a small cloud of motor smoke. I panicked, thinking I had permanently fried my chaotic hack. But when I turned on the fan and listened closely, the snoring still seemed muted. Somehow, the remaining hums and vibrations, combined with my mental focus, still worked. My chaotic hack, now broken and half-functioning, was still effective. By the end of the semester, I had refined the system. I replaced the blender with a hollowed-out storage bin filled with rice, which amplified the vibration hums perfectly. I even programmed a playlist of random low-frequency sounds from YouTube to run on loop through my old laptop, which synced with the fan. Roommates came and went, but no one ever slept as well as I did. I became a legend in the dorm for mastering the impossible snore problem without earplugs or moving rooms. Looking back, it was absurd. A hodgepodge of broken electronics, makeshift science, and improvisation that shouldn't have worked. Technically, it was a fire hazard, a violation of dorm rules, and a chaotic mess. But somehow, it was genius in its madness. I slept better than I had in years, while my roommate remained blissfully unaware of how precariously the entire setup was balanced. After graduation, I kept telling the story to friends, and they'd laugh until they cried. No one believed me when I described the rice-filled bin vibration amplifier, the fan-forced phase inversion, and the pseudo-scientific explanations I gave to curious onlookers. It was a chaotic life hack that worked despite every logical reason it shouldn't have, and it left me with some of the best sleep and the most ridiculous college memories of my life. By the time I moved out, my sleep stabilization array was still partially intact, a testament to the chaotic ingenuity of someone who refused to accept reality and just improvised with whatever was around. I don't think I'll ever encounter a hack that was as messy, dangerous, and yet miraculously effective, and I kind of hope I never do. This happened when I was working at a tiny, family-owned pizza place in my senior year of college. The place had 3 employees on a Friday night, me, the manager, and a kid who barely knew how to use the oven. The phones were ringing off the hook, orders were flying in, and somehow the dough machine decided that tonight was a good night to completely jam. Normally, this would have meant a total shutdown, angry customers, and tears from the newbie. But I had an idea, a chaotic reckless, and probably illegal hack that shouldn't have worked. I grabbed a garbage bag, ripped it open, and stuffed it with leftover dough from earlier in the day. Then I placed a pizza pan on top and started spinning it like a makeshift dough centrifuge. The logic was that centrifugal force would smooth out the dough just enough to keep the assembly line moving. I told the manager I had optimized the dough workflow and ignored the skeptical glances from the newbie. At first, it was a mess. Dough was flying everywhere, some stuck to the ceiling, some hit the floor, and someone screamed that the trash bag smelled like mold. But then miraculously, it started working. The dough spun perfectly, maintaining a near consistent thickness and allowed us to keep up with the insane Friday night orders. Customers didn't notice a thing. In fact, some even complimented the unique texture of the crust. Encouraged, I pushed the chaos further. The ovens were slightly uneven in temperature, so I stacked multiple pizzas in one corner of the oven and used the exhaust fan to redirect heat to the colder spots. It was wildly unsafe and probably violated every fire code in the city, but the pizzas came out perfectly golden and cooked through. Somehow, my dangerous improvisation produced better results than our standard procedures. The rookie employee became my unwitting partner in chaos. I gave him a pair of tongs and a spatula and told him to balance the heat waves while I spun the dough like a DJ at a rave. We were cackling the whole time, trying not to burn down the place, and customers kept complimenting how fast their orders arrived. By some miracle, no pizzas were ruined and the place ran smoother than it ever had. The peak of chaos came when a delivery driver showed up with a flat tire. The manager panicked, thinking the orders would be delayed. I grabbed the delivery tickets and improvised. I folded the pizzas into cardboard portable ovens and used a combination of thermal blankets from the storage room and the exhaust from the ovens to keep them hot during the 20-minute detour. It was ridiculous, dangerous, and possibly a fire hazard, but the pizzas arrived hot perfectly intact, and the customer left a tip almost triple the normal amount. By the end of the night, I was covered in flour sweat and remnants of flying dough. The manager shook his head, half horrified, half impressed. The newbie couldn't stop laughing, and one regular customer swore that the pizza tasted magically better tonight. Somehow my completely improvised chaotic life hack not only worked but exceeded expectations, leaving everyone in awe and disbelief. Weeks later, the owner asked how we managed such efficiency on a night that should have been total disaster. I vaguely mumbled something about process optimization and heat modulation, and they nodded, clearly convinced I had some secret genius. In reality, it was pure luck improvisation and a complete disregard for standard operating procedures. That night became legend among the staff. We dubbed it the Great Pizza Hack, a chaotic experiment that shouldn't have worked, but somehow saved the entire night, earned massive tips, and convinced everyone that I was a culinary prodigy. Even now, thinking back, I marvel at how a garbage bag, thermal blankets, and reckless creativity somehow created the perfect storm of efficiency, customer satisfaction, and sheer absurdity. This one happened during my sophomore year of college when I lived in a dorm notorious for broken appliances. The communal kitchen had one working microwave, a toaster that smoked if you looked at it wrong, and a fridge that froze everything but the milk. One night, I was desperate to make ramen, but the water kettle had decided it wanted a vacation. I couldn't wait for the bathroom sink to heat the water. That would take forever, and I was starving. That's when I came up with a completely absurd hack: the radiator ramen. I grabbed a metal pot, filled it with water, and placed it carefully on the radiator in my dorm room. Everyone thought I had lost it. The radiator was ancient, old-school cast iron, and borderline dangerous to touch. I told my floor mates, "Science will prevail," and ignored the horrified stares. The radiator warmed the water slowly, but somehow, by the time I had cracked open a few episodes of my favorite show, the water was nearly boiling. I threw in the noodles, and within 10 minutes, I had ramen that was just edible. Encouraged by this, I took it further. I realized the radiator was unevenly heated, some sections hotter than others. I rotated the pot periodically, balancing the heat zones like I was piloting a space shuttle. The noodles were slightly overcooked in one corner and barely done in another, but by stirring constantly, I managed a perfect chaotic equilibrium. The final product was slightly soggy, slightly chewy, but edible and delicious to my starving self. Then came the toppings. The dorm fridge had a tiny, nearly empty shelf, so I got creative. I grabbed leftover pepperoni from the lounge freezer, some cheese that was more mold than cheese, and a few random veggies. I microwaved them individually because the radiator couldn't cook them. The combination was questionable at best, but somehow the flavors harmonized in a bizarre way that tasted shockingly good. My floor mates, initially skeptical, took a bite and were stunned. "This actually works," one of them said, wide-eyed. Buoyed by success, I started experimenting with more chaotic hacks. I used a hairdryer to toast bread when the toaster decided it was done with life. I rigged a desk lamp to keep a small pot warm while I did homework. I even managed to melt chocolate over a radiator for a late-night snack, balancing it precariously on an old shoebox. Somehow nothing caught fire, and somehow it all worked. The peak of chaos came when I tried to host a mini dinner party for my friends using nothing but the radiator, a hairdryer, and my jury-rigged lamp. We made pasta, melted cheese, reheated leftover pizza, and even boiled eggs. The combination of kitchen hacks should have been disastrous. There were sparks, smoke, and one terrifying moment when the lamp nearly fell into the pasta, but somehow everything came out edible. We ate, laughing hysterically, amazed that disaster had somehow transformed into gourmet success. By the end of the night, my room looked like a war zone. Pots everywhere, melted chocolate on the radiator, cheese stuck to the floor, and a hairdryer dangling dangerously close to a textbook. But the miracle was that not a single person got injured, and the food tasted better than anything from the microwave downstairs. My chaotic makeshift kitchen hacks had worked in a way that defied all reason, physics, and common sense. The story spread across the dorm. People started calling me the Radiator Chef, and everyone wanted to see the miracle kitchen in action. My hacks inspired other students to experiment with their own chaotic solutions to dorm problems, from using heaters to melt butter to balancing water bottles on air vents for hot water. It became legendary, a complete disaster in theory, but a resounding success in execution. Even now, years later, I laugh remembering that night, a broken radiator, a hairdryer, and sheer reckless creativity somehow became the most memorable, chaotic, and surprisingly edible culinary experience of my college life. It was dangerous, ridiculous, and completely unnecessary, but it worked. Somehow, chaos and ingenuity had collided in perfect harmony, and my starving college self had pulled off the impossible.